start with one of the simpler things, which are called dot plots, dot frequency graphs, which is kind of like a bar graph, except, well, we use dots. But by using these, we get to see, is the data really spread out? Is it all squished into one spot? And what occurs most often? So here's how this is going to work. I don't need the calculator yet. Let's say, for instance, we are trying to figure out something about the ages of an audience at a concert. Now, looks like it's just about all teenagers and kids slightly below that, but sometimes you may get averages that are a little bit bigger than this. So we're going to draw a dot plot so we can visually see a little bit better, you know, what age students are typically coming to this. So first thing it says is we need to determine the highest and the lowest values. So what is the youngest person in attendance at this concert? 10. Okay, so 10 is my youngest. That'll be my bottom area here. What about the oldest? 17. Okay, so when we're making this dot plot, we're going to range our values from 10 to 17. So we're going to draw a number line that starts at the lowest and finishes at the highest. So I'd start at 10. And since there's not a large number of values, it's not like from 10 to 80 or something like that, I can just go ahead and individually list each of the ages in between. Guess I made my line a little longer than I needed to. So that takes care of number 2. And then all I've got left to do really is to place a dot above each of the numbers and keep going from there. So basically here, bless you, I'd start at the first one, and just above the 12 there, I'd put a dot. And I normally put a check mark above them then so I don't forget where I'm at. I mean, if somebody distracts me or something, I don't want to start all over and mess this up. And I'm just going to put dots in for each of those values to give me what I like to call a graphical representation of the data. I mean, some of us, who wants to sit and look at dozens and dozens of numbers just sitting there? Okay, I would, but I'm weird. Until I get to the end and I can see a picture of this. And what I hadn't mentioned, because I hadn't had any doubles yet, but once I get to my first double, which I think is 13 here, I'm just going to start stacking the dots on top of each other. And that's going to help me see where the biggest amount
10, 12, 15.
Okay, and that's a very good outlook. That's going to help us when we're trying to figure out in a minute what the mode is, because what you just said, whether you know it or not, is exactly what a mode represents. So it kind of, you could imagine if I'd have, instead of dots, if I'd have used like a bar graph, you'd see something kind of similar. But the dots let us do it a little bit quicker than having to figure out how many of each and then draw a bar graph that corresponds. This just lets me fire off the dots here. So once I get all the dots done, did that, and we evenly spaced everything, that's good. Well, what can I figure out from this? Well, move down here a little. What's called a modal score means what's the most common value. What value happened most often? 15. Now, I know that like 10 and 12 also had several, but whichever one is the most, we count that. And you can have more than one modal score. If, for instance, this last 15 wouldn't have been there, I'd have had a modal age of 10, 12, and 15. I'd have had a little more spread there. I can have multiple ones. But one of the other things we're going to add to that today is some other data. And some of these I think you're probably familiar with. So for instance, for our data up above, the range is just a fancy way of saying the lowest to the highest. And we basically did that when we were up here in number 1 when we said, you know, what's the highest and the lowest value? So in this case, my range would have, whoops, let me get back up where you can see it. I know, is back up here between 10 and 17. Whatever the lowest is, and then whatever the highest value is. Now, mean you probably have heard of before, but you might have heard it called something else. It's called the average. So mean is another way of saying average. Now, how do you find the average of something? Yeah. So we're going to add them all up and divide by the number of values we have, or the number of numbers. So like, for instance, if we were doing that on this one, you're like, oh my gosh, that would take a while. Well, sometimes if I have a lot of data, it might. I'm going to use my dot plot to do this time. And normally if I ask you to do these things, there won't be this many that I'm going to have you doing. But here, for instance, if I wanted to find the mean of what was going on here, basically all I'd do is I'd take each of the numbers, so I had 3 10s, and I'd go through on each of these and I'd add all the numbers up. Now some of you may get smarter than I do and be like, why don't you just do 3 times 12 instead? Well, because I'm being goofy. And sometimes I don't think brilliantly like that, so I need to have a backup plan anyway. So as I'm doing this, it probably would have been wise for me to be paying attention to how many numbers there are. Can somebody count up the dots for me and tell me how many dots there are, so when I get done I can just divide by that number? 15. Okay. So once I add all those up, I'm going to divide by 15. Okay, so in this case, my mean... You don't? No. Let's see. Uh-oh. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Somebody else have a different number?
I got it. Yeah, I got
18? Okay. Oh. Somehow we lost values somewhere. We lost values. That's okay. Okay, so our mean would be a little lower. Our average here would be about, we'll just round up, would be about 13.4. So my average would be right around in here somewhere. So if you're ever asked to find the mean, it doesn't mean go act mean, it means find the average. Median. Hi.
Jared Miles?
No.
No? Okay.
Maybe. Is the number in the middle, but here's the catch. The numbers have to be in order. So if they aren't, if they're just all randomly all over the place like our original list was up at the top, I'd have to put them in order first to try and find my median. Now if you have a dot plot like this, you can even find it using the dot plot, and here's what I normally do. I either use my fingers, but since my fingers are a little pudgy here, I'd rather just use these. You start from each end, and you keep counting towards the middle once you have them in order. So I'm like, okay, there's another 10, there's a 17, there's another 10. And you just keep counting with your dots until your writing utensils, or whatever you're using, come together. You're like, uh-oh, there's no dot for me to go to. They're in both of these places. So does that mean my median's 13 and 14? No. I got to do something to it. I'm going to use my average here again. If I have 2 that are in the middle and it's not the same number, what you're going to do, like in this case, I would take the 13 and the 14, because those are the 2 dots I ended up on, and I'm going to divide it by 2. Now if there is a single dot they come to in the middle, that's cool, because that's my median. But otherwise, I can add them up and divide by 2, and whatever value I get, that would be my median. And we're going to get lots of practice with this over the next week, because we're going to be doing lots of things with data and kind of figuring out some of the different parts. So the median can take some work sometimes. I'm not going to lie. It can. And finally, the mode, that'll be the one you guys like the most. We just talked about that up here. And that's the number that happens most often. And you can have more than one mode. If you have 3 numbers that all have the same number of times they show up, that's okay. But those are the 4 data bases that we're going to work a lot with, just so we have an idea, because you can make numbers say anything you want. It all depends on what numbers you want to look at and how you want to make them, work for you. So we're actually going to get a little more use here. Over on the back, this is more for information, and we'll see some of this some more, is, well, what do the dot plots mean? So when it says symmetrical, if any of you are playing the double game right now and playing geometry, you may have talked about symmetry before. It means it looks the same on both sides. So if I were to take this and kind of work it through there and kind of split it down the middle, both of my sides would look somewhat similar, somewhat the same. Okay? That's what symmetry means. But if they get all bunched up to one side or the other, like here, they're all bunched up over here to the left, and there's barely any to the right. What ends up happening is, this is called skewed to the right, which means there's not much information over here. Skew means not much there. If it's skewed to the left, I barely have any info over here to the left. Everything's all bunched up in the right. Hopefully that's like when we're making profits in a business or something and not something else. Bimodal, if I have two spots that seem to have high points, maybe these are the times you're most energetic during the day, maybe in the morning, and then you get pumped up again mid-afternoon for the rest of the day. But there'd be a couple of spots, and then on the very bottom is uniform. You're just sort of the whole day. You're pretty steady with whatever your information is. And like I said, we're probably going to get one of those flips going this next week, and that might be something to put in there, because sometimes these can get to be confusing. But knowing what information you have is going to be better. So let's take this, though, and notice this is the worksheet that goes with. So this is going to start us up into our next, we'll call it homework check, because we turn it in as we go. But this would be due again before we get to finals, because that's when our last quiz or test is going to be. So what I'm going to do is I am going to help out. I want to see how much helping I can do here. Yeah, I can do like the odds with you and have you guys work on some of the evens. So here, okay, this table shows us the 10 tallest mountains in the world. You're not getting me up on any of them because I don't like high places. So it says find the minimum, maximum, and range of the data. Okay, what's the shortest of those 10 mountains? What's the value, or what's the height of the shortest mountain? Because I don't even want to try to say some of these. 26,600. Okay. Oop, 26,660. That's my minimum. That's my low value. 26,660. What's the tallest one? 29. Okay, so if we were looking for a range, we actually have it already because we have the minimum and we have the maximum. These 10 tallest mountains range from 26,660 to 29,035 feet. That's a long ways up. So it says construct a bar graph for this data set. Use the ID numbers to identify the mountains. Let's see here. I got an idea. I'm going to pause me for a minute. So miraculously, we now have a piece of graph paper on here. Because they want us to make a graph on this, and I don't really see much room that they're giving us here. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. This bar graph, and they told us, they told us to use the ID numbers to identify the mountains. So what we're going to do is we're just going to, so they told us to label them by number. So on each of my lines, I'm just going to number them 1 to 10 because they told me that's what I'm going to do. And then as far as making my bars that go up, and I don't know if I gave myself enough room here, but we're going to find out. If my lowest value is 26,660, my biggest is 29,035, how much do you think I should make each line worth?
5,000.
I could, Now here would be my question. So if I made them each 5,000, let's see. Because I want to show you something here on where I can make the numbers look like anything I want. So let's say we did by 5,000s. Oh, I'm going to barely squeeze in here. I should have started a little lower. So if I went this route and did it that way, okay, if we went by 5,000s. So I'm like, okay, let's see. So number 1 is just over 29,000. So when I made my bar, I'd almost be to the very top, but not quite. And then maybe, I'll switch up colors so we can see here. The next one's about 28, so it's not going to look very much shorter than the last one did. And you're like, dang, most of these aren't going to look very much shorter than the last one did because there's not much value difference between them. That one's just below 28,000, so we're going just a little bit lower. Oops, and I'm going a little too low because that's going to be my 25,000 line. But here's basically what I'm going to say with these. Even if I look all the way down to the one at the end here, which is 26,600, it's still going to be, as far as the graph goes, almost the same. These are basically going to look like they're all the same size. Now, if your goal was to say, you know what, the top 10 mountains in the world all look like they're about the same height. I mean, there's only 3,000 feet difference, so I don't have a big deal showing that they're looking this way. It's no biggie. That's okay. But here's what I mean when I say you can make numbers look like anything you want to. Because what I'm going to do on this next one, because I'm going to use the same data, and I'm going to make one more graph. And then you tell me, you're going to be like, dang, it doesn't even look like it's the same thing. Because all of those, they all look like they're the same thing. What if I were to make myself another graph? And this one, if you want to, you can just watch. If you want to jot it down so you can be like, oh, I see what he's kind of saying here. One thing that you're allowed to do when you're making a graph of any type is, if there's a big value between 0 and where you start, you don't have to start at 0 every time. You can start at a different value. And the way you do that is you make this little kind of break thing, like it's a broken glass or something, and that says, okay, I'm starting at 0, but I'm going to show a big gap here with stuff. And maybe what I do instead is I say, okay, I'm going to start at 26,000. And maybe what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to go by 1,000 each time. Because by doing that, and I mean, you could even go by less than that. You could go by 500. You could go by 100. You're like, well, what difference is that going to make? What difference that's going to make is now, when I go to make my bars, and I start working across on these, what's going to end up happening is I'm going to see more of a gap. They're not all going to look exactly the same. Now, some of them will look real close to each other because in actuality, well, they are kind of close. But what I'm going to see is that now I can actually tell that there's a difference with some of these. And as they get shorter, I'm actually going to be able to tell at least there's a little bit of difference. Let's see, where am I to here? 8, 760, and 750. and 26,660. So if you were to look at those two data bits, you'd think they were for completely different information. Because you're like, well, these are all the same. Well, wait a minute, this one's a lot bigger and that one's shorter at the end. It depends on what information you're trying to get across. Now, to me, I think this is more helpful because you can tell that Mount Everest isn't exactly the same height as the rest. But it just goes to show you can make the data see like what you want it to. With that in mind, so we already did our graph on that one. So I'm going to come down here to number 3. All right, this table right here shows approximately how long it took members of Abdul's math class to come. What's that? As we go? Yes, but I'm going to do the odd ones with you and leave you some to do here. This is confusing. No. No, you don't have to. Now, this one's got a dot plot. I can do a dot plot in here. So we look and we're like, okay. Three, yep. So on this dot plot, again, if you want more space, keep using the graph paper I gave you. That's okay. And I look at my minutes. Now, here's the thing I got to remember. I got to have equal spacing. I can't just go 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 10. That doesn't work. So I'm going to start at 1. And for each of these, I'm going to go ahead and get a slot, just like when we made the dot plot on the note sheet. So then it tells me, well, I don't see a 1, so I'm not going to put anything there. When I get to 2, there was only 1 student. Okay, I'll put a dot. At 3 minutes, there were 2 students. So instead of individually writing 3 all those times, they're just going to let me get off easy. And I'm going to put 2 dots there. 4, I don't see a 4, so I'm going to skip that one. 5, there were 6 students. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dots. Uh-oh, at 6 minutes, there were 8 students. 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. I don't see a 7 here, so I'm not going to put any dots on 7. At 8 minutes, there were 3 students. 1, 2, 3. I don't see a 9. And at 10, there's 1. So I've got my dot plot. I'm just putting the number of dots that are there on each one as I do it. And then my range, my least time started at 2 minutes, and my greatest time for what I was doing ended at 10. I'm just doing least to greatest with these. And again, whether it's in a dot, whether it's in a bar, the information is still the same. Yeah, I was going to say, creating the graphs can be a little bit tedious. I'm with you on that. That's yeah, this is the homework sheet. That's why I'm leaving you the ones where the graphs are done already to do on your own, and we're doing them. Which one? B on number 1. We did B. B was the bar graph. Yeah, B. Yeah, this is the one that we're working on, making sure that we're doing. Like here, it says find the mean, median, mode, and range of the set. Okay. So again, let's even do this. Let's take B and D. We'll cross them out. I'll do one with you. I'll have you do one. I'm not going to go crazy on you here. So when I'm looking for my mean, we said before that's like an average. So I'm going to take the numbers that are here. I'm going to add them up. Yeah, there was a lot of numbers in that one that I had to add. Think of what data people do at these corporations and stuff when they're trying to do this with like millions of people and millions of numbers. Holy cow. So here, my sum would be 347. Now, how many numbers were there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them. Okay. So 347 divided by 9. So my mean would be like 38.6 if we wanted to round. If you want to put 0.55, 0.56, that's okay. Now my median, here's where I got to be careful. Median, my numbers have to be in order.
I can only do it first. I thought there was like one. Like, what was it? I thought it was like, you could have more than one.
Mode,
Oh.
yes.
Yes.
Mode, yes. We're coming to it.
Okay.
So when I get to median, my numbers have to be in order. So let's see. Lowest value, my lowest value is 10, and I just always, when I'm putting them in order, let's see, what's next? What's after 10 here?
What?
What's the next biggest number after 10 in that list? No, I don't think I think it's the biggest one, but what's the next one if I'm counting in order? 10, 10,
Where are you at?
1A, those list of 9 numbers
The lowest one?
after 10, because we just marked off the 10s.
25.
25, okay. Keep rolling. What's the next biggest one? 29. Okay. 36. Okay. Yes.
69.
Eh? 68. 72. Oh dear. So now, well, we've got to do one or the other. We've got to make picks on things. So when we're doing the median, remember, once they're in order, that's the number that's in the middle. Well, you still have time. So if I start from the edges, I just keep counting in. And if I end up on the same number in the middle, which I did here, that would be my median. Now, this is what's interesting. Mode is what occurs most often. What number occurs most often in the list?
What's that word? Median?
Median, uh-huh.
What is it?
The median is 36. Which number? Yeah, number 10 shows up most often, so that's my mode. And my range just goes from the least value, the start of my list. So my range starts at 10 and goes to 72, because that's my biggest number.
That's all we do. What's the mean?
What's that?
The mean. The number?
The mean is when you add up all the numbers
What did you get? Oh, I got it.
and divide by the number you've got. Right.
8.6.
That's right. So now here's what I'm going to do to kind of help out with some things here. Because again, I don't want to overdo you on this. So stick with me here.
Just not do all.
Well, hang on. I'm going to shorten some things. We're going to cross out 3 and 4.
What?
We're crossing out 3 and 4. Okay. All of 3 and all of 4. Because again, I just want you to get some basics down here. And I'm going to go back and do 2A with you here in just a minute. I just want to make sure we're all doing the same thing here. Okay? On that last page, we need to do question 1.
Okay. Why you put a star next to that?
Because these are 2 we're going to do.
Straight up.
Okay? So on this last page, we're going to do these 2. And what I want to do back here is I'm going to do 2A with you, and then so you'll have all of like 2 problems on this page, 2 on the back, and maybe like 1 on the front. That's not bad. So here's what we're going to do. Mean, median, and mode. You're like, well, how am I going to do this? All right, watch and learn.
We did this last time, remember?
Okay.
One of these up here.
Okay. So I start looking at these to add them. Shh, shh, shh. If this is 0 and this is 8, what number's in the middle here they didn't mark for this line?
5,
Close.
6, 5.5.
4.
Odd.
Because 4 is right in the middle of 0 and 8. What's right in the middle of 8 and 16? 12.
And then 20.
And then 20. Okay. So when I'm adding these up, okay, at a 0 there, I have 2 4s. So I'll get those. Oops, I don't need a double plus there, though. That's going to cause me a problem. Okay. How many 8s I have? I have 3. 12s, I've got a couple.
You're crazy.
And I have 1/16. So that would be the sum of my values. They're just giving me little dots instead of giving me a big old long list of numbers. But how many dots there are? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lets me know what I'm going to divide by. So my mean is 72 divided by 9, or 8. Okay, so I'm just adding up the numbers and dividing by how many dots there are. My median, now they're in order for me already. If I don't like looking at all the dots, if that confuses me when I'm trying to do this part, what I could do is I could go ahead and list them out if I don't like looking at the dots. That's not a bad idea. And my median, again, is just the number in the middle once I have them. And if I come to the same number, I can get that value. What number shows up most often? 8.
It died. My phone is straight off.
What's that? And then if we were asking for the range, yeah, well, in this case it'd be 0 to, because my last value where I see a dot is 16. So my range would be 0 to 16 on that one. Okay? So again, your job, 2B, 1C, and then numbers 2 and 4 on the front, but there's no graphing you have to do. The graphs are done already. And that's it.